Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Harris, I'd just like to come back to you, if I could, because I think you just said something in response to Senator Durbin that's very, very important. You talked about the business model of the companies, all of the companies that are up before us today, and in fact, all of the dominant platforms. And the point, your point, I think, is, and I'd like you to elaborate on it, the business model of these companies is addiction. The business model of these companies is advertising, which takes place by getting more and more users to spend more and more time online so that these companies can gather more and more personal information about them to sell them more and more stuff. Right? It's an attention treadmill. It's an addiction economy. That's the design. That's by design. They didn't wander into it. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't, oops, how do we end up here? They designed it this way. Addiction is the design. You've written a lot about this. You produced, as you've referenced, a documentary about this. Can you just tell us more about this core business model of these dominant platforms?
Yes, thank you. And I would actually see that there's so many of the ways that these platforms work actually comes from that original business model. So I literally remember in the early days of Instagram when they were trying to figure out a way to get people to kind of come back, and they decided to borrow Twitter's follow model. So the idea that, you can follow any user. Why did they invent this follow model? Let's just ask that way. Why are we following each other here and there? Because what it does is it creates this treadmill where every day or two, you see you've got 2 more people who followed you, and that creates what's kind of like a viral bait, right? It's like a clickbait that gets you to come back into the service to see, oh, what's that person? What do they want to follow me for? So they're preying on each other's social validation. And then they have this AI that sits on top that tries to predict, well, which users could we get to follow whom? If you want to say the problem has gone away, Facebook right now is testing the increase of suggested users you may know. By the way, this is in the film The Social Dilemma, when one of the AIs sort of twirls the mustache and says, could we get them to invite more friends? Well, that's actually literally what they're doing right now, which is they're saying, here's some channels, here's some people you might want to follow. And they're very good at predicting that next person. I've even done this myself because I've got a supercomputer pointed at my brain saying, yeah, this is your old friend that you might actually know. And it creates, again, this treadmill. It's all about getting us to come back. And it's really almost like a digital drug lord, because if you're a child and you saw The Social Dilemma and you say, hey, I'm going to uncheck, pull out of these services for a while. Have you ever tried taking down your Facebook account or not using Instagram for a week? You'll notice they dial up how aggressively, like a digital drug lord, to show you more notifications and more emails. You'll send you more and more emails. Each of the services will. They wouldn't do that if their business model wasn't preying on addiction. And these are all techniques, again, from the kind of persuasive framework that all of the people that I came up with in the tech industry really learned. Again, not because these people are evil, just little bit by bit. You do what works, and then it keeps turning into this treadmill, and it sort of turns us all into attention vampires that want attention from other people.
Yeah, attention vampires is a great term, and the amount of control that this business model then gives these companies over our lives is absolutely unbelievable. There's that infamous experiment that Facebook ran on its users in 2014, 500,000 users, to see if it could depress them or change their moods by tweaking the algorithm that then would refer the content that they saw. And of course, and the amazing and extremely scary thing is that they could in fact directly influence their users' moods. They could in fact change how their users felt about the day, or felt about a particular story, or felt about a particular event by tweaking their algorithm, because Facebook control what their users see, they control the interactions, they increasingly control how much time people spend online. These companies say that they're about social media, but really they once were, right? I mean, they used to be social media networks. Back in 2006, when Facebook first introduced the news feed, there's this great post that Mark Zuckerberg wrote called "Calm Down, Breathe, We Hear You," in which he assured users that the introduction of this new thing called the newsfeed would be not a very big deal. He says, we've been getting a lot of feedback about Minifeed and Newsfeed. We think they're great products, but we know that many of you are not immediate fans. There's an understatement. For those who are worried about privacy, he went on, nothing you do is being broadcast, right? Rather, it is being shared with people who are about what you do, your friends. Of course, what turns out to be true is it's not your friends who he's concerned about, it's advertisers. And who they're sharing this personal information with is advertisers who are in the business of trying to manipulate the user. So let me just ask you this, Mr. Harris. These companies have been able to do this. They've been able to manipulate content. They've been able to push particular content to users. They've been able to try and interfere with their users' own moods, in large part because they get a special blanket immunity from this government, from the federal government. Here's my question. Why should any platform that engages in algorithmic amplification or behavioral advertising, why should they get the Section 230 immunity? Why shouldn't we just remove Section 230 immunity for any platform that engages in behavioral advertising or algorithmic amplification?
Well, Section 230 is a difficult it's a double trade, and so it's going to be a complex one to get into there. It's important to say that whether the companies want to or not, if they took their hand off the steering wheel, they're still manipulating people's emotions. In fact, the more they take their hand off the steering wheel, the more outrageous values blind engagement, which means that literally the most outrageous stuff, the most child trafficking stuff, the most sexual pornographic stuff would rise to the top, and that would also be a form of manipulation. And if you compare side by side how much restrictions we do in an IRB study in a psychology lab at a university, where if you're going to experiment on 14 people, you've got to file an IRB review. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok are on a regular daily basis tinkering with the global brain implant of 3 billion people's daily thoughts with no oversight. I think what we need to do is actually compare side by side what are the regulations and protections, as you're talking about, that we apply in one domain and we're not applying in a different domain. I think the focus on content in 230 is problematic. I think it's more about the design and fundamental oversight about the way these platforms fundamentally operate.
I'll just say in closing, Mr. Chairman, that I think Senator Durbin put a very good question, which is that why are we so slow? Why has the United States been so slow to confront this kind of manipulation and these kinds of deleterious effects? And I think part of the answer to that, frankly, is money. And we all know that's true. These companies spend enormous sums of money trying to influence this body, trying to influence our regulators, trying to influence the federal government. And it's time that this Congress did something about it to show who's really in charge. It's not them. It should be the people. It should be us. I'm to the point I think we probably should repeal 230 completely. But we certainly have to take action to stop this kind of rampant manipulation for profit, which is what these companies do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.